morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our first panel discussion on the state of the Hamptons real estate market. My name is Adriana Nava, and for those of you who don't know me, I've been in the Hamptons real estate market for about 10 years with various roles, from an agent to working for a local brokerage. So I come to it with that varied experience. Before we get started, I wanted to give a disclaimer on the data that we're going to be going through today. This data is sourced from local brokerages and is reported agent activity. I'll be the first one to admit that it's not complete. It does not include off-market trades, nor does it include listings that were withheld from the database. In addition to that, it is subject to errors, and we do make our best effort to go through and check and correct the data. We are working on implementing processes into this data that will improve the quality and the completeness of it. In the meantime, I'd like to point this out so that as we go through these numbers, that we take them with a little bit of a grain of salt. I've been studying this data for almost 5 years now from the various sources that exist for it. And we strongly believe that this is now in a good enough place where we can gain an accurate sense of the overall Hamptons market trends. Even when we break it down, it is good. And that is our purpose, is to discuss the trends. As we work on our own processes of improving the quality and the completeness of the data, we will be looking to the local brokerages who will be coming out with their annual reporting within the next few weeks for final numbers. With that out of the way, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists that have taken time out of their busy businesses to join us and help provide context to these trends that we're going to be digging into. Representing our veteran agent community, we have Angela Boyer-Stump with Sotheby's International Realty. Hi, Angela.
Adriana,
hi. And Sarah Minardi with Saunders and Associates. James Payton with Corcoran has been in this market for 7 years and came into the market with a very data-driven approach, which has helped him quickly establish himself as a market expert.
Hi, everyone.
Representing our fresher agent community, the voice of the future, we have Cindy Scholes with Compass.
Hi, everybody.
And also Sarah Goldfarb with Douglas Elliman.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'll give a quick overview of the format of the event for everyone in attendance. We're going to go through an overview of the market as a whole together, followed by a deeper dive of the $3 to up to $5 million price point. The panelists will jump in with context and examples where they have them, and we will have time for Q&A at the end. You don't have to wait to comment or ask a question. There's a chat box. Feel free to add comments as we go there. And as you come up with questions, please put them in the Q&A box. There's also a thumbs up symbol. Once questions start to come in, if you have a similar question, you can upvote them and we'll prioritize the ones with the most likes at the end. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to look at is the number of sold listings. One thing I want to start by pointing out is that 29 was a soft year, historically speaking, when you look back at the last 5, 6, 7 years. On the website, you can see we have these interactive charts. If you hover over them, it will call out the different lines. You can hover over the different points to get the detailed statistics for each month or year, depending on which chart you're looking at. So when we take a look at the number of sold listings comparing year over year, you can see that 2018 was slightly stronger than 2019, and we have here in the blue 2020. 2018, we decided to include to provide that bigger context since 2019 was softer. And that's important to keep in mind when we're looking at the percentage increases. The Hamptons does have a typical seasonal trend. You can see January will typically start off in a very average middle range. It will dip down as you go into winter a little bit. As we get closer to summer through spring, it will tick up. You see a jump up. As we approach summer, people get more urgent to try to get into something for summer. Once people are settled for summer, we see that it dips down a little bit, and then it will increase as fall comes, summer draws to a close. People don't want to lose their foothold in the Hamptons, and they then take action and purchase a property. Usually we'll see a slight decline going into the holidays. And one other thing that's important to note before we get into talking about 2020 itself is that toward the end of 2019, we already started to see a strengthening and an improvement in the market. Interest rates are a big part of the 2020 story as much as COVID was, and it's also a part of what we look at when we're forecasting into 2021. So keeping that in mind to help explain this increase in activity prior to COVID, we're going to take a look really quickly at the interest rates, and I'm focusing here on the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. You can see from this chart that it has been on a decline for a while. Interest rates have been getting lower and lower. Once you get into this fall 2019 point, this becomes a very low number historically speaking, and it's only gotten lower from there as we've gone through and up to date. It's the lowest it's been. If we pull this back to look at the last 50 years, back to 1970, for the overall trend, this is where we are today. And you can see that this is now a number that most people have never seen in their lifetime, that their parents have never seen in their lifetimes. So when interest rates are low at this level, what it does is it makes home purchases accessible to more people. And this is a part of the strengthening of the market that we saw toward the end of 2019 that actually set us up for what we ended up seeing happening in 2020, in addition to the impact that COVID has had. All right, going back to our trends here. If we go back to the number of sold listings, we can see that 2020 started off, pretty average a little bit. You can see the increase in strength from 2019 in the beginning of the chart. Started by following the normal trend of trending of a little slight downward movement, not as severe as in previous years because of that natural strengthening of the market. However, it stops following the pattern there, and that's where COVID comes into play. You see it go down a little bit, and then it'll strengthen over time. We'll get to that in a moment. I want to jump over to the number of new listings for a second so we can see the impact that COVID has had in the beginning. We saw an uptick in inventory, again, signaling the strengthening of the market, leaving 2019, going into 2020. And then we see this massive dip between February and April. And as we all know, this is when COVID entered our lives. What I would love to know from you guys out there in the field is, how did these COVID shutdowns impact the transaction process?
I'm happy to speak about that. So what I would say, hi everyone. What I would say is that you were speaking about interest rates and whatnot, and the COVID shutdown, certainly it stressed out the system, but I don't think it really slowed us down. It took a moment for people to just kind of catch their breath and go, what is going on? What are we living through? Am I making the right decision buying this house? Am I not? And really, COVID changed the playing field because people had to teach old dogs new tricks. Let's just say that. So, whether it be from the attorney standpoint, the title company, the mortgage business, the banks, everything took a total 180. And we went into this system where not only was everybody at the beginning of, before COVID hit, I was going to every closing I could possibly go to, but that changed. Nobody was going. They had to make different arrangements. So I would say that there was definitely that catching breath moment where people had to kind of figure out, were they doing the right thing in terms of purchasing a home? And once they realized where everything was going, where the shutdowns were, and what they needed for their lifestyle with these changes, that's when it all really ramped up again. But I would say it stressed out the system, but it didn't stop things from happening.
I would agree with Sarah on that point. I think that the biggest thing was logistics. And obviously everybody had to jump up to speed. There was an incredible amount of stress. But personally, I didn't have one deal throughout that time that didn't make it to contract or didn't close. Certainly, there were some more polarizing negotiations, and especially during those couple days when Wall Street had some huge percentage swings and trying to take advantage of one side of the deal. But overall, I think that everyone that we work with, from attorneys to the bank representatives, are all professionals, and everybody really ramped up their business enough to handle all the logistics. And at least from my experience, although the stress levels were high, nobody lost out on their deals.
I think that, James, that's 100% on point. But when you move to like where we are even today, doing a Zoom type of presentation, the uptick in business was incredible. And we all had to kind of learn how to communicate more through Zoom meetings, through emails, through phone calls, and even virtual walkthroughs were happening where sellers and landlords didn't even want you in their home, but buyers and tenants wanted to see the product. So it was challenging, but the end results were phenomenal for 2020. It was just such a banner year.
That's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if we go back to the charts for number of new listings in contract and sold, which we have up here on the site, we can see that as those restrictions started to ease, people started to get a sense of how they're going to make it through these changes. We see an exorbitant increase in the number of new listings, an exorbitant increase in the number of in-contract listings, and as a result, sold listings as well. We do see a second dip down, which we'll get back to a little bit later. But what was the mindset of the sellers that came to market at the height of COVID? Like, how did that thinking process and listing change?
I guess I'll jump in on that. I think that a lot of sellers were on the fence for a while about listing and selling. I think this was a catalyst to getting them to kind of, okay, why not now? Let's try it now. It was a little problematic with some of the newer listings because you weren't prepared with photography. Some of the pools weren't open yet. You couldn't get people to actually come and do the work. You couldn't get the pool companies to come. The tennis court companies weren't able to work. So the introduction of a listing was a little bit more challenging at the very beginning until the weather got nicer and they kind of released the restrictions. But overall, I think that people were feeling, why not now? Let's try it. Let's jump in. Let's give it a shot.
And that's really interesting because it's like, even despite all of those challenges, these numbers just kept going up and up at rates that we haven't seen. I mean, the last time we saw something like this was probably after 9/11, and it wasn't even to the extent as which we saw in 2020, just signaling the I guess, severity of the demand at this time. And back to James's point about, things really didn't slow down. It just was sort of figuring out how to navigate through the changes. Want to move on to, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, at the height of it, certainly in July and the beginning of that, when you had a dozen deep at these open houses, regardless of what you brought to market at that point, it was really just the numbers. And even for us to say, oh, wow, it's 20-30% trading high, to the marketplace, that's just, not to make it light of it, but it's just a rounding error, really, when it comes to the amount of opportunities and inventory for them. The buyer pool was just so deep, and still is, that I think that all five of us on here is probably the first point in any of our careers that you just have, a dozen buyers and nothing to show them. So I think that's what continues into what we're going to see into the next 24 months, and a lot of the points you're going to cover as we get further into the conversation.
And every price bracket as well. It's not unique to one price bracket. If you're under $1 million, there's no inventory. If you're up to 2 million, no inventory. You're looking for 3 to 4 million, there's no inventory. It just kind of keeps repeating itself. You'll send the email request out, is this still available? Sorry, in contract. Sorry, in contract. So I think we are starting to see a shortage of inventory. And I do think we have buyers that are still anxious and eager to buy.
I also think that there's something to be said about the median price point now.
which also feels like sort of the price of entry to the Hamptons, which is that low to mid 2 price point. And I think that that has been, in my opinion, just where I'm seeing all of these new buyers, right, that are coming from, that are available to now go into that sort of low to mid 2 price point because of the low interest rates, that typically probably would have rented in the past too, right? And then when you think about your 10 to 20% down payment, right, that's basically what it would cost for you to rent nowadays. So it completely switched their mindset, I think, as well, which caused the increase in the buyer pool and all of that.
Sarah, I think you bring up a really good point here. Like, we say like new buyers, entry point buyers, we're calling them like at a $2 million mark. Like when I think about the Hamptons market, it's very much like a want market, not a need market, at least for a lot of our clients. And, when I'm looking at these charts, it's so interesting to see the data, and even going further back, that the Hamptons was kind of like a depressed market for, at least the past 5 years until COVID hit. And that kind of correlates to, we all know that I've recently just started working out here, so I'm going to make some broad stroke statements, like macro views of the New York market in general. Like we saw like luxury real estate start declining in 2015. And it didn't really come to light until the media started talking about it in 2018, when there were changes in tax laws, SALT tax deduction, everything like that. I think that if you're buying a $2 million home out here, or $1.5 million home, it's likely a second home. You're a luxury buyer. What COVID has done is now brought like a refocus into residential real estate. Like these buyers before, that were traveling the world and wanted all these sexy investments in VC, throwing off double-digit returns. They weren't thinking about the emotional commodity of real estate, which COVID has now brought into full focus.
Correct.
I'm so glad you brought up those policy changes, Cindy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we go into the 2021 forecasting toward the end of our discussion here. I want to keep us moving on to, what we've seen going on in 2020 and get to our digging in more on these points that you're all bringing up about the activity that we've seen. To put things into context, because the volume does come into play as we talk about like honing in on specific areas and price points, I wanted to take a moment to point out that 2020 has registered almost as much as 2019 and 2018 combined. This is an exorbitant increase in volume. And on the site, for anyone who's interested, we do break down these metrics into month over month and year over year, if anybody's interested to go in and take a bigger look at, when things occurred and how much and at what points. So this volume increase is important to keep in mind as we continue this conversation about explaining what we saw in 2020. If we go back to these new listings, Angela, you were talking about the inventory and the availability of inventory being challenging today, but you had, in our previous discussions, you had made a point about the inventory going into 2020, and I was wondering if you could share that a little bit.
I just feel that it's been a great start in January already, with people coming out wanting to look. But as you start to call your associates to find out if listings are available, or even my own personal listings, you see the inventory slimming down. It's gone. And if you're looking for something kind of cookie cutter, basic, which has been what I think the buyers that are looking now are probably looking for, because they are kind of, as Sarah had said, they're looking for that placement home. Maybe they're not going to rent right now, they're going to buy instead, or they're going to at least try to purchase instead of renting. And they're finding that door is kind of closed for them right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the charts show. 2020, we started off relatively average, but at a little bit of an improvement from where 2019 had started off, and even where 2019 ended. There was inventory available in the beginning of the year. However, as this chart shows, we had the dip down adjustment for COVID, skyrocketed up through the summer, and then another dip down into the fall, which has brought us to your exact point that it is just very challenging right now to find inventory across all price points that are, satisfying to buyers.
And I'm not sure, I follow a lot of the other markets. I think that's unique across the country right now. If you look at the Aspen market, you look at the Florida market, if you look at almost at any pseudo luxury home type markets, that's what you're finding.
Yeah.
People are looking for a place to go to kind of live again. I think everyone's kind of homing in on homing. Like, I want to be in a house. I want to live in a house now. I want to have a little bit of a yard. I want to be able to sit outside. In our situation, it really took people from the city to come out. I don't know about anyone else on the panel, but you try to drive from Southampton to Montauk, it's busy out here. There's a lot of traffic on the streets right now. And that's because of the increase in purchases and rentals. So both of these markets.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I'll jump in on that too, Angela and Adriana. So, you know, I think what we're in is this mega trend where people now that, you know, COVID caused it, but it's not going to be this mega trend, this cosmic shift is not going to be managed by COVID. I mean, people are really honing in on the fact that they're liking their life. They're liking their life with not as many people. First of all, you don't want to be near as many people just because of what we're all going through. Let's get those vaccines going. But, you know, they're realizing that their lives were just too busy. They were always on the go, you know, and you were strapped by your job, you were strapped by your children's schooling. And, you know, in the 1970s, you know, just to kind of go back in New York, apartments were a dime a dozen. There was a mass exodus from the cities, you know, and then we got into the 80s and 90s, and the cities were, you know, exciting again with theater and museums and whatnot. But what we're seeing, and this is not going to change. This is not going to change. It's just a real change in lifestyle and community, and it's not just about buying a house anymore. You know, we used to think of a house as a landing pad, and you know, where you know, for everything else we did, exercise, dinner parties, gatherings. But now your home is your center of your life. It's your space. You've got the outdoors. You've got, you know, the extra bedroom for the in-laws. You've got, you know, you need that fire pit. You know, in the city, you've got to pay for storing your car in a garage. You know, here you can have
I heard outdoor heaters were sold.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get an outdoor heater. And so
I mean, forget trying to find a Peloton bike, you know, I mean, everybody was laughing at the Peloton lady commercial, you know, 2 Christmases ago, but, you know, they're laughing all the way to the bank. It's, you know, and what you get out here in the Hamptons is you don't have to join a gym. You can go out and walk the beach. And I remember when I was living in the city, all I wanted to do was come back here because I'm born and raised out here. So all I wanted to do was come back here, walk the beach, be on the beach, go outside. I mean, you should just see, for example, you should see Buckskill Winter Club in East Hampton. It is packed with families and kids ice skating and hockey and outside, and, you know, everybody's social distancing and just getting that fresh air. And that's something that the Hamptons has here. And regardless of if people maybe went to Connecticut or upstate New York or whatnot, if you have some connection to the Hamptons and you want that beach lifestyle and that air and that light, it's not going away.
But people, so
I don't blame them. I'm here to stay. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah,
I
Wait,
love
what
all of this
Sarah says. Sorry.
I love all of this conversation. I want to just keep moving for time purposes, but we're gonna get back to this in our next few points. What I want to ask you all, because I mean, what I'm hearing is this rapidly changing market, this change of lifestyle, this reevaluation of how we live our lives. How do you go about pricing in a rapidly changing market like this? You know, the next thing I wanted to talk about was, like, you know, these negotiation processes and these prices that we've seen. How do you go about that? Cindy, this is something you and I have talked a lot about lately.
Yeah, you know, I am newer to this market, and I have to say, like, without relying on this data, I wouldn't be able to be doing what I'm doing right now. And like, I'm super data driven, and looking at these numbers is helping me explain to my clients, yes, you cannot look in the rearview mirror. Anybody who's a spreadsheet buyer who's looking in the rearview mirror is not going to have a house for 2021. I'm pretty confident in saying that. I mean, maybe at certain price points, and we all should be cognizant of value, but I do believe that, you know, walking into a house, explaining to someone the data points, letting them, you know, conclude what they believe their projections are going to be, And the best way you can do that is looking at years past, say this is the trend. And it's been super interesting to see certain segments of the market, particularly the over $10 million market. We've had some success there because clients don't feel like they're actually paying COVID prices. Just the velocity of sales has picked up, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily changed pricing too much in the homes that we're looking at least. It's kind of like the same as 2006, 2007 pricing, very similar to like the Greenwich, Connecticut market. So, these data points help us to explain to clients, why they should be making this decision or not. And I think the media has totally overblown the amount of money that you can like make in the Hamptons. Everyone's expecting to get like a 50% return on their investment in 2 years. That's crazy. That's
Right.
wild,
Right.
So,
and I'm really glad you brought that up, Cindy, because value is something that I wanted to move on to next. When we were digging into this data, yes, we saw exorbitant increases. And the big story here is these price point barrier breakthroughs that we saw, right? So we had a great example of this is Amagansett Lanes, right? You had these land value properties that would have traded in the higher twos, 2.7, 2.8, something like that in previous years, now see threes on them. So you had a shift in the inventory and the properties traded between price points up, right? And if you put that together now, we're looking at these charts with the decrease in inventory, back to Angela's points of, there's just really not much available to be shown and traded. What we ended up seeing is these properties that had been on the market going back to 2015, finally seeing their day and getting their deals and finding their buyers. The days on market of in contract has gone down significantly, but when you put it into overall numbers, it's down, but it's not down as much as it would have been if that inventory was not available. And actually, thank goodness for that older inventory that it was available, because it helped things keep pace. And without it, I mean, we saw pricing go up, but it would have gone up so much higher. So in that sense, the softer market that we saw before COVID really helped us be able to sustain something through this period of time. I'd like to now shift into diving a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about the $3 to up to $5 million price point. This was the anchoring price point of 2020, and it makes sense because it's the middle price point. It's where we can more clearly see this price point barrier breakthrough and this shift up in the value of properties. That said, I'm going to scroll through so everyone can get a sense of, what data we have here on the site. We have overalls, and then we have totals. These chart interactive. You can go through, and as you hover over, it shows you which months, listing discounts, days on market. Please feel free to go through and investigate this. We break it down into different price points and different areas. So whatever's interesting to anybody joining the call, you can do a deeper dive right here on the website. I'm going to go ahead and go into our $3 to $5 million price point. What's interesting to note here, and unfortunately, until I do a little bit more investigation as we go through our process of improving the quality of data, I can't actually show the breakdown of the granular details just yet. We're hoping to shortly in the future. What we ended up seeing is that, 70% of the properties that traded in the Hamptons in 2020 were under $3 million. And of the total listings that traded, 77% actually went for discounts. Now, we know that part of that is a result of sellers saying, okay, the market's hot, let's price higher, but they priced a little too high. But also it's a result of most of those properties. 20% of the properties that traded for 10% or more off of the asking price. And most of those were listings that had come on before 2020. And that's that snatch up of that older inventory as new inventory became less and less available. Demand just continued, just like James had pointed out, it's just stayed strong even when there was a shift in the processes that were required in order to transact property. Starting off, we can see that the number of sales in this price point more than doubled the combination of the two previous years. This is sort of the story across the market. Similarly, sales volume in this price point exceeded $1 billion. Again, more than double of the previous 2 years combined, which didn't even make $500 million each. So this is a significant increase. Our median did go up, and I know some people will look at this and say, well, we're talking about all this increase in value. Why is this not higher? Was this 1.35%? And what I wanted to point out and take a look at the data is that when prices fall on an increasing volume, the trend is gathering strength on the downside, right? So this 1.35, the fact that this is even up at all really does signify the strength of the market, because it goes back to those price point barrier breakthroughs, right? We just saw so many properties enter into the next level up price point. So they were heavy on that side of the lower side of the price point, and it went up. But as you calculate the data, it's not going to show that it's up as much as what the reality of the value is, which is exactly why I'm so glad that you've all been here to join us to provide context to what these numbers actually mean. Similarly, days on market, we do have the decrease, which is expected. And you might look at this and say, well, that's not as low as I would think, considering, I think it was something like more than just over 20% of listings went into contract within 45 days or less in 2020. And this is a result of that older inventory that got snatched up, kept that not as big of a decrease as it would have been had that inventory not been available. So what I would love to know from you guys is, what impact on the market overall was felt as a result of these, price point barrier shifts? Cindy, you had mentioned that in the 10+ million range, you're not really seeing that COVID pricing. Could you speak a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think that we're seeing these, huge jumps in pricing in that particular segment of the market. Rather, this is a wonderful opportunity for people who did get in 2005, 2006, 2007, get out at maybe the same price that they paid for. If we're talking about this price point in particular, the 3 to 5 range, I think the biggest driver of this price point is the incredibly attractive interest rates and mortgage packages. People doing interest only mortgages are not really feeling like that they're stretching their budget upwards over $3 million. And I also think that, COVID aside, and I'm happy that, we're not totally just focusing on COVID in this conversation, the fact that people have a new lifestyle and flexible lifestyle, they need bigger homes. And that's what's pushing people in this particular price point, I think.
I think.
Yeah, I think what always pushes this price point, one thing we have.
James, you're cutting out a little bit. Maybe you want to switch off your video to give your Wi-Fi a little bit. I'm going to stop James's video so you can maybe hear his voice a little better.
Tremendous rental in the Hamptons, which really, sustains and buoys our entire.
James, you just went back. Could you repeat what you said?
Adriana, I think it would be really interesting
to know.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you now. I turned off your video to give your Wi-Fi
Can you hear me?
more bandwidth.
Fix that.
We can hear you.
I'll jump in while James is working on fixing his issues over there. Hi, James. Fix it up for us. It's like my first deal of 2020 that closed was a house that traded at 9.4 million, but they were actually on the market over the last 2 years as high as 14.9 million. So just going back to what Cindy was saying, it is an opportune time for people that have higher end product to consider reducing their price to capture the buyers that are in this market. Perhaps they were overpriced when they first listed, perhaps they weren't. There just weren't enough buyers. Now you have the buyers that are willing to jump in. But I do think that the buyers that are in that 9, 10, 11, $15 million range, they're looking for homes that do represent some type of value. I had another listing in the fall that sold that we started at 15 million that ended up trading a little over 11 and a half, like 11,250. But when you think about where something starts and where it ends on the high end, I think those percentages are very different than where you are when you're talking about the $3 to $5 million range, where I had a listing in East Hampton that went 250,000 over list price in November. So the variables are shifting in the percentages when you go into higher rates of sale. You sell on the higher side, you're getting a bigger discount. If you're trying to sell in the $3 to $5 million range, you're probably going to be paying a little bit more than what the market is bringing. If it's listed at 3.5, you better start your offer at 3.5 now. We've become Los Angeles, and I'm being corrected that the sale price on my $15 million reduction was $11,750,000. Sorry.
And I think that's a great point. And I think like what we're seeing in this market in 3 to 5 is that the wealth is just outweighing the inventory. You know, we're seeing like this K-shaped recovery, and a lot of people did extremely well in the markets in 2020. Buyers are feeling really rich, particularly in this segment of the market. And to your point, Palm Beach, Miami, Aspen, you know, all of these luxury markets where inventory is really tight. Everyone is saying that this is a common theme in this price point where wealth is outweighing the inventory.
Sarah, you were jumping in with some comments.
Yeah, well, so I guess this is sort of a question, I think, to the group and something for us to think about in general, which is in that 3 to 5 price point. I feel like, and James, maybe this is something you can comment on, there was a lot of new construction versus resales. I mean, obviously there were still resales, but I feel like there was a ton of that new construction product in the market ripe and ready to go this year. And then my other comment is really about, I also saw it. So again, we're talking about the 3 to 5, range here, but even in the 2 range right now, I mean, things are trading, and as I'm running comps and I'm looking at everything, literally it's 2% off ask, if that, right? So, I mean, there's really a little bit of wiggle room and delta here for people to, make lower bids, especially with the competitiveness that's still happening today.
Everybody hear me now? Am I back in?
Yes.
Great. Yes. Perfect.
So agree with that, what everybody said. The one thing that keeps driving our market, and the point I wanted to make after Cindy said it, is that rental demand. And there was a tremendous inventory built up of $3 to $5 million homes going into 2020. And it's interesting to see, if you look at the statistics, and maybe something we can follow going forward, is how much of this new construction trades and then is put back on the market as rental property. But I think that's what's always fueling this Hamptons market. It allows these buyers to carry these properties in their portfolio, if they're renting it out July and August. We all know those numbers. I think that's one of the investment points that we push on all these people. Obviously, a lot easier to carry 2, 3, 4 properties in your portfolio if it's really paying for itself. And I think in my situation, I would say at least 50% of the new construction I sold immediately was turned around and put back on for rent. So I think that people chasing that 5, 6% cap rate, maybe even up to 8% cap rate in this last season, is just further investment opportunities in the Hamptons. And something Sarah said earlier, talking about just loving being here, there's always that demand. There's this constant demand to be in the Hamptons. And if anything goes wrong in the world, and I sort of equate it to when we had the blackout 15 years ago, everybody bought a generator. So I think for at least our generation, no one's going to be caught without a place to go. And that's the comfort for them and their family. So the demand's going to be up for the next 2, I think 3 years. Interest rates, until they pop up, then we'll see a little bit of slowdown. Certainly the land side and inventory, just want to get this in because I didn't get much to say, is still getting tight. So I think that, even on my side, we're starting to do pre-construction deals, and to find that families are willing to wait 10 to 12 months to get into their Hamptons house is not a very long time. So as agents, we just need to say, you know what? Yes, there's a little bit of inventory, but the demand is strong enough just to keep pushing it and let the buyers make their decisions.
Yeah, and just to jump off that point, James, it's so important these days with this shift in lifestyle, with people being able to work from home, that's an accepted way of working. You're not hopefully not forced to go into your office if you don't have to. So the the fact that people are looking, even if they have a home now, they're looking for something a little bit bigger if they need more space. And just that overall lifestyle, it's something that's been thrown on us because of COVID, and onto everybody who has a home, who's wanted a home or rented a home out here, but it's here to stay. And you might go back to the city for a little bit, you might be back and forth, but this is the home base. And everyone who's buying out here, who owns out here, is making the most of it as much as they can. And to your fact about the rentals, everyone that I've ever sold a house to have always asked about, okay, what's a rental capability here? And we always go through that exercise. And what I found this year is that there were people that never thought about ever renting their homes that were affected by COVID, in the fashion industry and the real estate, the restaurant industry, who would never have thought about renting their homes, and did, because they needed another way of supplementing their income, because they were just shut down in so many, in a way. So the fact that we've got that to come to circle back to is an important point.
And
Sarah,
sorry, Angela, I just want to keep this moving. I love that you guys are bringing up this rental, and we're going to get back to that in a little bit. I wanted to throw it back to James, because we've been talking about new development and the changing of the demographic, the reevaluation of people being here more and more. James, you do a lot of business in new development, new construction, and land deals as part of that, or land value deals. It's not something yet that we're able to track at Hamptons Market Data. It's in our future, but we haven't gotten there yet. We do want to provide a bigger context for everybody joining. Could you talk a little bit about what those land or land value trades have looked like in 2020?
Sure. Well, we all chase the same deals, Angela and Sarah, in this, same niche, creating product for ourselves, obviously, to sell and build a customer base off of that. But what we've seen, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years is that the land prices, and just to use my hands, have really been eclipsing new construction sales. These investors out here and developers need a certain number to put the money into the ground. And if they're not going to get it, then they're going to go elsewhere. So I think certainly what we've seen, at least myself going into this year, I've done the same amount of land deals, but I'd say it's gone from 80-20, where builders buying over end users, to maybe 60-40, 70-30 the other way. So there's going to be a lot less inventory on the development side. There's a lot more end users buying that land. They can pay up and take a little bit of vig off the table that the developers would usually get, and still come in maybe 5-10% under retail. They're not looking to make a big on it. So that just leads back into less inventory and tighter markets, I think, overall. What we're going to need to see is a shift in the land prices, but I don't think we're going to see that. I think, as even Cindy touched on, the last decade of the Hamptons didn't have much, there wasn't much upside, but it was interesting to see where that came from. You could buy a house 10 years ago and the land might have doubled or tripled, and your house is depreciated. So that land value in the Hamptons is just continually upticking. And now the entry level is 4. There is no homes at 3 and 3.5. So James, I don't think that
you saw that with our chase on the listing that I had. I mean, James and I were negotiating on a piece of land that I had listed, and I think we ended up with 4 buyers in the end.
Well, in the end, Angela, your listing, and I just pulled it up. 118 Merchants Path is a poster child for COVID, and really what turned that on. And a couple other properties that I know we can all pick out. One happens to be, I think, on Rowing Hill Court in Sag Harbor, that we saw trade 3 times with a small renovation and appliances, and people that just needed to get in. And of course, as agents, we say, "Oh my God, who bought that house?" But in the end, when people are nesting and need a home, and demand is so strong and half a dozen deep, now we're in the situation once in our lives as agents where we're in the driver's seat.
True.
And I think, so the one thing I'll say is, I know we're sitting here, we're talking about the data, we're looking at all the information, but I think we always, as agents, we think about the fact that real estate will likely be an emotional purchase on some level for people, right? So I think, yes, of course, demand was, high, the inventory was low, but, when we were looking at what was happening, last year in March, April, May, I mean, people were literally fearing for their families' lives, right? So you couple emotional with safety and all of these things. I think it's just, it's outside of the fact that you have the space and you have everything there. And To your point, people realize that they need to have this additional, sort of like safe space for themselves, right? And I think that's really what the Hamptons has become. We know that people have their kids out here in school, and people have done pods, right, with teachers, and it's a real thing. So the Hamptons really is now a year-round community for people where, literally people have said, I went and looked at the suburbs. I don't want to live in the suburbs. I don't want to live in the city. And the Hamptons is the perfect in between for me, right? And you see the blade going back and forth from Quag to Miami. I mean, I'm literally getting the alerts on it from, East Hampton Airport, West Hampton Airport, all of these things, that people are now being able to go back and forth between their places and, Palm Beach and Miami and the Hamptons.
This is all great. This is so insightful for putting this all into context for 2020. I'd like to bring it back to today and where we are today. We did see a little bit of a decrease of activity in the fall as a result of this tightening of inventory, just that there's really not much available for people to purchase. However, like even though the trend has been down, like I'm just looking at this in contract listing graph right now, the trend was down, but like still where we end up in December, we're exorbitantly high compared to years past. And then taking that back into this past week that we even saw, now that we're out of the holidays, we go to the homepage of the site, we're tracking here the number of sold listings on this black line, in contract gray, and new listings blue. And for the first time since the last week of September, we saw the number of new listings to market exceed the number of in contract. So it looks to me like things are starting to come back a little bit in terms of like, one, we see demand is still strong. Two, is the market starting to catch up with the demand? Is it still a challenge? Where are you guys today with your business and with your buyers?
It's still a challenge, I would say, is that the amount of quality inventory is certainly less than the demand. The demand far exceeds that. So for instance, I do a lot in East Hampton Village and East Hampton in general, and to find a turnkey home in East Hampton Village with a pool that you could move right into under 2.5 is hard.
Non-existent.
It's really hard. There's very little out there, and or if somebody's trying to stay under that $3 million threshold. So it's what we are doing, or what I'm trying to do is encourage anybody that was on the fence about potentially listing their house, that if they do not have plans for it for the summer, if they were just going to rent it or they weren't going to use it, put it on the market. It's the time is now. Do it now.
But I agree with Sarah. I'm on the phone now. Statistically speaking, most Hamptons buyers are sort of 4 to 6 years. So everything that I've sold, I'm on the phone saying, listen, this is the marketplace. This is what I think you could buy. But more importantly, checking in with their family and saying, how can we help you, and where's your situation right now? Going forward, I'm nervous that are all these buyers going to stick around until there's inventory to sell them? Or are they going to decide at some point that, we're all saying, oh, am I going to sell all these homes? But maybe by the time the inventory is back up, their plans have changed. COVID has died down. They're back into the city. So it's up to us to be as aggressive as we can and make as many deals as possible while the ducks are quacking, as I say.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and it's a great transition into, okay, where are we going into Q1 of 2021? What can we expect in 2021?
So already have a very busy, I'm sure everyone here on this panel, schedule of showings, not only for sales, but for rentals as well. I think that people are having a little bit of, I'll use this slightly, PTSD of what happened last year, and don't want to be caught in that same situation in March where everyone was scrambling. So I have people that are like, I want to lock it in. I want to lock it in now. And, they're willing to go where some of so for example, for rentals, the high-end rental market, I think a lot of people are pricing their things probably even 20% higher than what they priced last year, because they're still looking to get some sort of a premium. And my clients are saying, well, let's go in and negotiate. Let's see if they just want to get it done and rent it so they don't have to worry. It's COVID still, right? No one has the vaccine yet, so let's try and lock it in. And from a sales perspective, as I'm saying to all of my clients, just because something's still on the market for 3 months, if you talk about, the average days on market, even if it is 45 days, you're still within that 120-day mark. You know what I mean? People are still buying. They are very much still active right now. And bonuses just came out in early January too. So we're going to see, and it's happening like that.
And interest rates are
Not
still
sure.
very low.
Correct.
On the rental side, I mean, my first rental that I did this year was a rental that was listed at $495 for the season, and it ended up going for $525 at the end of the day. So even rentals are not where they were in the past. If you would have asked me 2 years ago if someone would be paying over list price for a rental in the $500,000 range, I would have said, not on your life. Everyone was trying to negotiate at least 10% down, maybe 15% down off list. Now, as I said before, even on the sales, if you want something, you should be coming in at full price. Make your offer at full price. It doesn't mean you have to go over that number, but I think we've watched enough of the data today to see that the numbers have adjusted. People are ready to sell. People are ready to rent. Those that are will take the deal, but they want the number they're asking. So, I would be encouraging anyone with buyers to say, just start at the list price and put the deal together and put it together fast, because it's a very competitive market.
Right. Show that
On the tail
well.
of Angela's comments, my biggest recommendation and strategy to my tenant clients last fall was, after Labor Day, offer 10% more and sign it up. And I would say 80% of them did that, and they're feeling comfortable now.
Mm.
We were going to leave some time for Q&A. I don't see any questions, and hopefully that's an indicator that we've been comprehensive and very, understandable in all of our comments and covered everything that people have been wondering about. I'd love to take the remaining time, since we have no questions from our audience, to talk a little bit more about the rental market. I was talking to a friend the other day who was looking for something, and she was talking about, they've been renters for a while, and, they're usually in this sort of like 100,000 to 150,000 for the summer price point. They've been looking, and now these houses that she's used to being able to get for those prices are $200,000 or more. What are we seeing in pricing? Is this unique to that price point? Is it across price points? Could you guys speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, Sarah touched on it, Minardi touched on it a little bit. The last season, people were trying to maximize making a little bit of money on their rental. This season, people are using their homes. So not only do you have people that did rent last season using their homes this season, you have a lot of the homes that used to be rentals are now sold, and they're not available. And people that rented last year renewed their rentals at the end of the season. So the inventory has been just compressed into almost nothing. So if you're watching and you want to list your house for rent, call all of us, because we have tenants all over the place and we have no inventory to deliver to them. So.
And I think it's interesting too, because as agents, we have the data of what things were listed previously. So you can look and see that even in 2020, something was listed for 125,000 for July through Labor Day, and now it's up to 200,000. So it is 100% gone up across the board. That's people are, whether they're expecting, again, the COVID premium. I mean, we're talking not just 20%, we're talking another 40% here, right?
Well, those are interesting numbers to see. I mean, it'd be really interesting to have this conversation in 4 months to see really where all these rental trades came in, to see what the market really did. Because I think we're a little lofty. So
I agree.
Numbers come in.
I agree. I think people are getting, if they're really pricing their house $75,000 more than what they got, 2 years ago, I think that's agreed. I think that's a lot to ask for. However, if somebody's going to pay that, great. And maybe that's the mentality of jumping that price point. What we really saw just quickly was how the winter rentals went through the roof in terms of pricing, and it worked out for some owners and not for others. So it's hard to find anything in that lower price point even year round. And there was a question that came through, Adriana, did you see that, about the summer rentals going into fall purchases? I did have a few that happened that way. And they weren't even summer rentals. They were rented here in March. They came out in March and April, and then they were looking throughout the summer and then ended up purchasing. So I had a number of things like that happen. And I'm sure the other panelists did as well.
Sarah, I
Yeah.
think you bring up a great point too. Like, these people who have like really ambitious pricing, like money always flows to value. If you don't have a nice product and you're photographing something with dirty laundry all over the place, nobody's going to pay you a high price. But I will tell you something, I do think we're very strong, like we see it, we all see it. Like we're going to have a strong rental market, because what I'm seeing from my peers is we all lost a year of our life. Everyone did, and like, I know the only way that I grow professionally is by my relationships and seeing people. All the movers and shakers are in the Hamptons in the summer. They're all in Miami right now, but they're all here. And like, maybe you're going to pay up an extra 10, 20%, whatever that means to people, growing personal relationships and business relationships. I think it's well worth to pay that.
If you can find the inventory.
If you can find it, yeah.
I think we're going to see the rental market be worse than anything we've ever experienced, because there is just a lack of inventory for rentals. The buying market, people will slowly start to list as they see the numbers going up. They'll try to test the market. But I think a lot of people have already made their plans to be here in the house they either rented last year, the house they just bought, or the house that they rented last year, but this year they've decided they don't want to rent because they want to be here.
Right. And to that,
sorry, guys,
too,
I have to stop because Sarah, I'm sorry, we have to stop because we're almost out of time. I wanted to just take this last minute or two. I know. Well, listen, if we want to keep this going, we can certainly do it again. I wanted to just take a minute to give you all an opportunity to perhaps offer a piece of advice. We have a very diverse group of attendees today, from buyers, sellers, other industry vendors, agents. One piece of advice you can offer to either somebody selling, buying, renting, landlord, to take away from everything we've talked about today.
So one thing I would say is that I think it's important not only to look at the data and leverage the data, but understand the context of what we're talking about here. One of the things that we didn't talk about was, and I'm literally having these conversations with my clients today, so in Amagansett, for example, the median, and across the Hamptons, the median price point went up 24%. But between 2018 and 2020, those two specific years, it only went up 5%, right? So think about the context of things and look at the data, and don't worry that you feel like you're paying over for a premium, as long as you know that at some point you will have, you're not, maybe it is 24%, but maybe it's not 24%. So just take a look and make sure you know all of that information.
Yeah, and anybody who would like to know more detail about a particular part of the market that you're interested in or working in, it's all available on the hamptonsmarketdata.com website. We break down into specific areas and price points, so please feel free to check it out. Angela, any final comments?
No, I think, Adriana, I don't even know what to say about what you've done and how you've organized all of this data. It is
and where you find the time.
Impressive. I don't know how you found the time. A, you're right, but B, just the way you've structured it and how you've got all the moving parts, and you can slide this, and it's just very, very impressive. And I want to thank you, because I've watched it develop. I've been a fan since you started. And I'm so impressed by everything that you've done. And I just want to thank you. And I want to thank you for putting the panel together today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you guys for joining us. Anybody, I think James, do you want to have any final closing comments? Did we lose him again? We may have lost him.
I'll add one last thing. I think that sellers should maybe think about, why they're selling. We've had a couple of deals where we've come in at like full price cash and people have changed their mind last minute. Like, think about, like, money's just money, like, what is your next plan? What are you going to do with this? I think if sellers have like a good plan of what they're going to do on their exit, the deals might be a little bit easier.
Agreed, completely. And the more that sellers can do in advance, get that updated survey, find out, make sure that there's any violations, get those taken care of. The more that can be done in advance, it makes the deal so much easier for everybody involved. I know the attorneys appreciate that.
Great advice. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. And Hopefully we can get together again, in the near future and sort of see where things are and keep everyone informed of what's going on in the market today. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Thank you again, Adriana.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.